Hi, my name is Sarah Bacher, and I am here today to tell you a story, a true story, a story that is very much a part of our local history. All too often, events unfold all across the globe, and they receive our attention for just a moment before the memory all but fades from our minds. They do, however, stay imprinted in the minds of the people who lived them. The story I am sharing with you today is of a man named Dave, who was a victim of the Great Flood of 2010 in Rhode Island. It began on March 15th with what became known as the minor flood. After days of heavy rainfall, groundwater flooded the basements of homes. Pictured here, we can see the water level on the walls. However devastating the minor flood was, no one was prepared for what was to come next. Just 2 weeks later, on March 30th, the rains came again. And with the ground already saturated, the swollen Patuxent River overflowed its banks. The river crested at 21 feet. Homes were ruined, cars destroyed, family heirlooms, clothes, toys, important documents, sentimental photos, all engulfed by the Patuxent. The river took weeks to recede, and the process to rebuild took months. While Dave and hundreds of people like him were still processing the events that unfolded, a new perceived loss was brewing. The Great Flood of 2010 is the only time in Rhode Island history where a presidential disaster was declared. What this means is that the Federal Emergency Management Agency, known as FEMA, came to Rhode Island to aid in disaster relief. They came with tents, they came with answers, and they came with funding for the flood victims. And then they left. Approximately 1 year after the flood, many people who received funding received a letter in the mail. The letter stated that FEMA had made a mistake, largely of its own fault, and that the money that was given to Dave, he needed to pay back, and that they would take a check or money order in the amount of $30,000. Dave and other flood victims formed a committee, and with a lot of help from Senator Jack Reed, they were able to get FEMA to cancel their debt. Jack Reed also brought a new idea to the table and told the Rhode Island residents that they were eligible for a government buyout. What this means is that since their homes are now officially in a floodplain, and it is very likely for more severe flooding to occur, the government will buy out their homes. Dave's entire street jumped on the opportunity to sell. And after a year, the offer was finally made. The government was willing to pay $1.2 million, divided between 11 houses. The buyout wasn't going to work for Dave, as he still owed money on the house. And after exhausting all other resources, all over avenues, him and his family decided that they had to declare bankruptcy. Yet it did work for many of his neighbors. What happened to the houses, you might be wondering? Dave recalls the city coming in with bulldozers and leveling homes, one by one, down to the foundation, and filling them in with dirt. The events that unfolded following the Great Flood are most certainly interesting, but let me allow Dave himself to give insight on the experience.
You don't have a house. And you always hear about people like, how does someone become homeless? You know, are they gambling too much? Are they drinking too much? They just had some hard times and lost a job. How do they become homeless? It's just one series of events after another. But I was looking at that, and at that moment I said, it only takes one of these things to make you homeless. It wasn't a series of events. It was just one flood, and I was on the street, and we were homeless for 9 months. We lived with friends for a couple months, and then we moved in with my parents in their basement with my kids, and I had to run my business, because I owned a business, web design, marketing business. We had to run that out of the basement at the bar, at my parents' bar in their basement, unfinished basement. I had my laptop, the whole thing. And every day I just, it's like, I think of that movie, It's a Beautiful Life, where Nazi Germany, the father would joke around with his kids pretending that the Nazis were actually clowns. And he'd say, oh, here comes the clown. Let's try to hide. And, he didn't want his kids to go through or to know what was happening. Well, I would pretend the bar was an ice cream parlor. And I'd say, okay, kids, we're going to have an ice cream parlor. It's England's ice cream. And they're like, yeah. And they'd come up to the parlor, and there's a fridge back there. I would pour them ice cream. And I didn't want them to feel like we were homeless. And not that that's something to be ashamed of. It's just, I wanted them to not feel the pressure that I felt. And it was extremely difficult to smile and be happy.
Disasters destroy. Financial systems fail. But yet people do persist. Thank you. Bye.